Now, the one thing that I told you before that I would say, there's three things, in my opinion, that can either make or break you.
This is the PMP Industry Insider Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome out to another episode of the PMP Industry Insider Podcast, where we take a look at what is changing in the pest and lawn industries, and we take you to the front lines to those that are driving those changes. I'm Donnie Shelton, owner of Triangle Home Services, which owns Triangle Pest, as well as Triangle Lawn, which are my favorite pest and lawn care companies. And with me is Mr. Dan Gordon. I'm going to get in front of this now, Dan, because I'm sure we're going to get feedback. Anytime I don't use my normal mic, I get a little feedback. We are recording from Pest World this episode, and I am using my AirPods to record.
And I am using my J-Bro headphones, so hopefully we don't get any hate mail.
Your J-Bro, it's so fitting.
J-Bra. Hold on. What is it called? It's called J-Bra, not J-Bro.
Oh, that's even better.
Yeah, right.
Even better. All right, Dan, how about you introduce yourself, Dr. Didn't Use It, sponsors, talk about our peer groups, and then let's get into our topic because we got a lot to get done today.
Yep. So welcome. Sponsors, Colmarch, as you plan for 2026, partner with a team fueling growth for pest and lawn pros. I actually met with them yesterday at Pest World, and they are jacked and ready to go. So podcast listeners can get the first month free. Just go to colmarch.com/podcast. And then our next sponsor for more than 40 years, and our booth is actually right in front of theirs or right behind theirs, is PestSure. And spoke to Todd Burke for a while. They've been protecting pest control companies with specialized insurance and safety programs. Nobody understands the industry better than them. Learn more at pestsure.com. And Voice for Pest. You can learn more about what Voice for Pest is doing at voiceforpest.com/podcast. And our facilitator, David Billingsley, he does our peer groups. And we also, a little bit of announcement, we also will be having Sherry Spencer Bachman. She'll be facilitating some peer groups, and we're pretty excited about that. We're organizing those peer groups. Anybody who is under $1 million in revenue and really wants the help, she's awesome at that. And that's where she's going to kind of work with us and clients and whatnot. So if you're interested in joining a peer group and you think you're too small, let us know, because Sherry is awesome. Okay. And if you're interested, we tell you to go back and listen to that episode 136 with David, but also listen to episode 238 with Caleb Cunningham. He really he's a power peer group user. And so he's awesome. So you can listen to that. And that is all the public service announcements that I have.
I was just going to say, there's I know this episode is going to be kind of on the backside of Pest World, but it's really cool to see in the peer groups the companies and kind of where they start and then how they're doing now. And I don't say that's because we have the only peer group or the best peer group. I say that because folks are getting together with their peers. They have somewhat of a board of directors, and people that they can bounce ideas off of, people that can help them develop their own business. And so I just think it's a fantastic idea. If you're considering it, I would highly recommend you do it. I've never seen someone join one of these peer groups and their business not just take off. And I mean that in every sense of the word.
No, it's absolutely true. Whether it's our peer group or another,
right.
There are some good ones out there.
Absolutely.
But that's I think that's terrific. So today's topic, this is going to be kind of a dry run for me, but also hopefully a treat. We actually reworked our cost study, the PCO Bookkeepers cost study. I think we did it in 2018 or 2019, and everybody says, hey, why don't you update this thing? And the fact of the matter is that the financial model of pest control really doesn't change. So doing it every year doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But because of the technology, we're using some pretty cool consolidators and report writers. What we're able to do is press buttons where it used to, the first cost study took I don't know, hundreds of hours. Now I can press some buttons with this Fathom and get that information. And what's really cool is we were able to do it regionally. So that's the difference. And I'm doing a presentation, or by the time this airs, the presentation will be over. But this will be the presentation annotated and discussed by Donnie and I. But this will be the presentation that I'm doing at Pest World. So I'm putting this up on the screen. It's the 2025 industry cost study. My partner Brian Post and I will be doing uh, the presentation. But that said, we can jump into it and kind of talk about it. Basically, it's this data set, and we're going to talk about gross margins and revenue growth. And we actually created a proprietary KPI called the PCOB Competitive Index, and we'll talk about that. I think you'll like that one. And then we'll talk about the P&L and, some other things, team member productivity and debt liquidity and things like that. Now,
Okay.
a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. This is a slide that'll be up. It'll talks about us, PCO bookkeepers, who we are, what we do. Over $2 billion in sell-side transactions, more than $1.5 billion of annual pest control revenues flow through us. And in conjunction with NPMA, everybody knows NPMA. NPMA is our organization where we all get together and we all support the industry. And I know that there's a whole bunch of people out there who, should I get involved? Should I not get involved? NPMA is worth its weight in gold just because of the information, the networking, and whatnot. And if you've never been to a Pest World or an academy or one of the regionals, I think you should definitely think about that. And Donnie, I know you're a big fan of that. The other thing that they do is they're a steward of the industry, and this NPMA Foundation, there's a whole bunch of scholarships. And in order to give back to the industry, PCO bookkeepers, we established a scholarship, and every year somebody can apply to it. Most of the scholarships from this foundation are for entomology, PhD students, and master's students, and whatnot. But I wanted to establish one for kids of parents who work in the pest control industry who are interested in studying accounting in the pest control industry. If you have a kid who's ready for college and she wants to apply for this scholarship, just go to NPM or go to www.npmapestworld.org/foundation, and you can see a list of all of these scholarships. They're really terrific, and we're pretty proud of the one that we set up. So that was pretty good. And now I guess we can kind of jump in. Why did we do this? Well, we did it so that people can benchmark themselves against not just themselves, but against others in the industry. Jump in anytime you want here. But here's
Well,
one.
I've got a few questions. So
Yeah.
let's talk big picture first before we do
Hmm.
this. So, I agree with you about the cost study. Like, I'm wondering, were there any like, oh, this has changed since we last did it? Like, are there some big aha moments
Yeah,
out of it?
yeah,
Like, I mean,
there are,
you
and
know,
I have some theories, and we can only talk about theories because we really don't know. It's a fluid industry, and things move. But here's an interesting one, right? So this is the pest control market. If you look at like in 2022, 23, MPMA created their annual report, and they said that the industry was 11 billion. There's
mhm.
another company out there called Specialty Product Consultants, and those guys are they're the folks who do the studies and try to figure out how big the industry is. And they believe that the industry is like 12 billion and growing at 4 to 5% annually. And just for the heck of it, I took the PCT 100 and added them up, and that was 12 billion. So my question
Um,
is, who's right?
mhm,
How big is this industry? And I
mhm.
know that what's interesting is the PCT 100, that those are the 100 biggest, but we probably have 30 or 40 clients who belong on that list who don't want to be on that list for
That's
various
exactly what I was getting ready to
reasons.
say. Like, I don't think
You're not
we don't
on it,
report
or
it. No,
yeah,
no. And
so
I don't think I'm unique either. So there's a lot
no,
more
you're
sitting under their hood.
Yeah,
you
so I
know.
wonder, is the industry actually like 20 billion or so,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So who's right? That's
Right.
the interest, and I don't have the answer. But it's just interesting. If you listen, I don't know what PCT, do they audit the numbers? They don't, but you got to believe that Rentokil and
Yeah.
Rollins and even some of the bigger, door companies that they're reporting the proper numbers. So, I fully
Yeah. I
believe
don't.
that
I
it's
don't. I don't
12
think it's
billion.
MSU. You know what MSU
Yeah,
stands for?
no. What's that?
Making stuff
Shh.
up.
You're
That's
making
what I
stuff
meant.
up. Yeah.
Making
No,
stuff up.
there may be a little bit of that. We actually did a deal, I'm going to say about 10 years ago, where in the diligence, at the end of the diligence, it was like a $3 million deal. At the end of the diligence, the buyer asked me, you know, this guy said we saw him on the PCT 100, and he was 17 million, but we're only got 3 million. Where's the disparity? And I was like, I don't know. So, but I don't think that there's a lot of that going on.
Right.
So,
Right.
but it's kind of interesting. So, how big is the industry? And it's just a question that I'm posing because I don't have the answer. But
Hmm.
maybe Tim Mulrooney, who he actually said he'll come on the podcast again, and with William Blair, and we can talk about that. You know, uh, and see what he thinks. And he's actually the one that pointed out to me. He said, "Why don't you add up the PCT 100 and
Hmm.
see what they are?" So
Yeah.
that's kind of interesting. So anyway, so this study, 246 firms, 46 states, 583 million of revenue, anywhere between 500K and 22 million dollars, who offer a variety of services. So you say, oh, Dan, you said that you guys do 1.5 billion, but of revenue that runs through PCO bookkeepers, why only 583? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Anybody who did lawn care, I knocked that out, okay, because I wanted a pure pest study. And door-to-door companies, we love door-to-door companies, but it's a different model, right? Their gross margins are much higher, their marketing is higher, so it would skew the data. So maybe at some point in the future we can do a cost study for door-to-door, but we took those out, and so now we're at 583, which I think is still a really good sample size.
Hmm.
Now, um, the one thing that I would say, these are the regions, right? So there's 246 companies, but like some of the regions have a lot more data points than others. So, for example, the Southeast, I have 77 companies. The Northeast, I have 55 companies. And then you've got Southwest at 25 companies, Mid-Atlantic of 19 companies. What that means is that some of the data can be skewed by certain companies. So we may, and I can tell you that some of the numbers look a little odd, but I didn't want to just, make adjustments. It is what it is. And these are our clients. And also a couple of, there were some MPMA folks who submitted survey results. So,
Well, you've
that's,
got to believe too, though, some of that is just a function of the industry itself. I mean, there's no secret that the Southeast has the vast majority of pest control companies, right? I mean,
mhm.
so there's some of this is going to be just the makeup of the industry, right? I'm not
Yep.
saying there isn't like, that Mid-Atlantic is super anemic, but it is compared to the Southeast, right? And it is even the Northeast has a little bit more. So I don't know.
Well,
I guess
these
my point
these
is,
are these are PCO bookkeeper clients, right? So that's our scattered chart, and it's kind of interesting. So years ago, the prior CEO of PestPack or of WorkWave, Dave Giannetto, he published a report and said, that the growth of the industry was really anemic. And I said, Dave, that's not what we're seeing. And how do you square that? And he said, well, it may be that because we're a software company, we'll take any one man operation to the,
hmm.
and
Hmm.
you guys, have people who are willing to pay you a lot of money to do accounting and whatnot. So it might be a better class of companies that you're looking at, and that's the only thing that we could come up with. So anyway, I don't think that this is characteristic of a distribution of pest control companies in the U.S., but it is a distribution of the PCO bookkeeper clients. This is where our clients live.
But that's kind of what I was saying, though, is I think it's not going to be lockstep, but I think it is. There is some similarities there because again, when you look at like, MPMA used to have like a scatter map that showed all the members, right? And that's still not 100%, but the lion shares in the Southeast. So anyway,
Yep.
we're
Yep.
splitting hairs here. Keep rolling. Let's keep
All
going.
right, let's go. So there are four KPIs that I felt were really crucial. Um, and the first one is gross margin. We'll talk about that. We've talked about that 100 times, and everybody knows it, but we'll go through it. Revenue growth, recurring revenue, and then this competitive index, which I know you're going to get a kick out of. So, okay, gross margin, what is it? Gross margin is basically what does it cost you to manufacture an hour of pest control service? It's the revenue minus the direct cost, the costs that go into producing this hour of pest control. And you can compare it to manufacturing, right? So what goes into that? Well, technician labor, the chemicals that he or she uses, and the vehicles and uniforms and a few other things. That's expressed as a percentage. So you multiply it times 100% and then divide it by revenue. And your gross margin, we've always said that best in class companies are 50 to 55%. And that's what we found in our last cost study. What do
Mhm.
you think happened this time?
It's better. I bet
It's
it's 60.
better. Well, it's not quite 60, but this is just a slide on how break even is done. So one of the most important reasons why you calculate gross margin is because it determines your break even. If I have a 50% gross margin and I have $100,000 of fixed costs, that means I have to do 200,000 to break even, and then I start making money at a rate of 50 cents on the dollar. Okay. Now, this is the interesting part, right? This number has gone up. Now, what I'd like to say, and I may be wrong, but I like to say is this podcast was responsible for a lot of people raising their prices big time during COVID. Big
Uh-huh.
time. We were pounding the
Not to be
table.
not I was gonna say not to be self-serving and thinking we're big stuff, but that is true. We
It
we absolutely we were going against the grain and telling folks that you absolutely because I mean it was inflation was taking off, right? I mean, you're right. I mean, we
and you
talk
got a
about this
free
a lot.
pass because
Yep.
everybody was doing it, all different industries, fuel,
Hmm.
materials, right? And so you got a free pass. The other thing is that people, so what affects this? Well, pricing affects it, but also route efficiency. Just operating an efficient operation. But these are the numbers. They came out pretty much between 55 and 60%, not 50 to 55%. To me, this is
Hmm.
good stuff. This is really good stuff, right? That means the
Hmm.
industry's getting better. Okay.
Yeah,
Now,
I mean, I would also say another thing that can you go back to that slide real
yep,
quick? I just want to another thing I think that affects it's still pricing, but what affects pricing? And I would say that's the competitive landscape. You can see here in the Southeast where there's a very high density of companies, and I'm speculating here. I'm with you that I don't know the full breakdown of this, but it's not terrible, but it is lower. And usually that's a function of there's also pricing pressures, right? And so you have to be aware of that. And the more competitive it is, the more pricing pressure you're going to have. I mean, look at the Northeast and then look at Mid-Atlantic. I mean, those are strong. But in any case, just I'm
yep,
pontificating. Let's
yep.
keep
No,
rolling.
no, you're absolutely right. And so that said, the next KPI that we looked at is revenue growth. That's something that it's an indicator of market demand. But again, how do you tap that revenue growth, right? We hear companies, geez, I'm not doing very well. Like we know that the industry is growing, but I have clients who are like, yeah, I only grew 1% this year. Well, that's because either you're not taking advantage of the ability to sell or your attrition is high, but we know that the market is growing. So revenue growth is an indicator of market demand. People want to do business with companies that are growing in their market. Team members want to work for successful companies. So revenue growth is a big one, right? And
Mhm.
it just everybody wants to grow. Okay. Now let's talk about revenue growth and the data set started September 1st of 24 through August of 25. This is kind of interesting. Take a look at this, right? And
Yeah.
again, Southwest, that's our smallest market at 15%. We probably had a very large company in there that skewed that. But our William Blair index that we do is tells us that we're probably around that 10% long term. That's what the industry's growing at. Um, Now you could talk about your experience if you want, but this is what we're seeing over that year. Um,
That's pretty impressive. I mean, the mean at right at 9.5%. I think there might be a little skew there, but nothing gross. And I mean, if you take in like even if you I mean, it's pretty on point with what you would expect to hear, which is around 8%,
yeah.
um, even if there's a slight skew. So no, that
So
makes sense to me.
if you look at the Rollins, if you look at their 10Ks and listen to their earning calls, we're actually pretty close to that. The Rentokils are lower, but they're coming, they're starting to turn that around in a big way. So, but small companies, the smaller you are, the bigger the percentage you can grow, right? So, 50% of a million is 500,000. 50%
Right.
of 20 million is 10 million. So,
Hmm.
it's okay. So that's the growth. The recurring revenue, this is an interesting one. Okay. So basically what we're seeing is that recurring revenue is between 70 and 75% on average. Obviously, recurring revenue, everybody knows predictability, operational efficiency. It allows you to budget properly. How many trucks do I need? How much chemical should I order? I can negotiate that. It's the durability of your company. Now, some companies won't take any one-time work, so they're much higher, and some companies will work on other ancillary services that are one time. So, but this is the average.
Well, the point I was going to make is that this is the real power of your previous slide of revenue growth. I mean, your revenue growth is very much predicated upon how much recurring business can you lock down and keep? Because, if you're really great at this, it doesn't take a ton of marketing or sales to keep that growth number moving. If you suck at this, you've got to resell all that, all the
Yeah.
cancels as well as, even more just to get it going. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. Okay. So that's a pretty interesting one. I think this will be good. Give me about 3 minutes to go through this example. I've gone through it before at presentations, but I thought that it was interesting. This is the the power of recurring revenue. So I have two examples: a company that does 80% recurring and one that does 50%. They're exactly the same in everything else, right? They do $3 million or 250 a month, and but the only difference is that 80% versus 50%. In this example, 50% gross margin, 10% net profit, everything's fine, right? So $3 million business that's doing 10%. So it's $300,000 a year of profit or $25,000 a month net profit. Okay. Now,
Hmm.
this is kind of interesting. So, what happens when we get a major jolt to the economy, slowdown, financial system meltdown, geopolitical event, and also COVID, right? Who ever thought that COVID would be a thing? What
Hmm.
happens then is that one-time job revenue dries up. People freak, right? As well as some
Hmm.
recurring revenue, but it's not on people's mind. They're not canceling, right?
Right.
Now, so just in this example, uh, what happens, assumptions here, the pandemic happens, everybody gets crazy. And anyway, assume that 80% of the one-time work dries up during the early stages of COVID, and also assume that you get 10% skips on recurring. Okay, now watch what happens to these two companies. Basically, what happens is you lose a whole bunch of revenue, right? Because the one-time
Hmm.
guy is losing 80% of his um, one-time revenue. So is the 50% guy, but there's a significant reduction of revenue, right? We go from 250 a month, the 80% company now has 190 a month. The 50% has 137 a month, right? And then if you
Hmm.
work it right down the P&L, the guy who had 80% revenue, recurring revenue, he only lost $5,000. The 50% person lost 31,000. Now,
Hmm.
you say, geez, this is an interesting example. This was actually a client of ours, that the 50%, right? The monthly loss of $5,000 hurts, but it's not the end of the world. 31,000 a month, you could be in some real trouble. Example
Yeah.
for it
How
is,
many months of those? Yeah, I was gonna say, how many of those months can you stack up? You know?
well, that company almost went bankrupt and went way in debt to sustain itself.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. So that shows us how powerful the recurring revenue. Because people say, well, why is it so? Because we have clients who are like, yeah, I'm going to do that $100,000 bird job, and you're right, the margins are great, everything's good, but it doesn't recur, it doesn't add value to your company. But if you're banking on that and something crazy happens, you're screwed, right? So,
Right.
okay, this is the one I think you're going to appreciate. This is the PCOB. I need to trademark this competitive index. It's a proprietary metric for evaluating a company's performance and relative strength. This one is, it takes into account growth, profitability, and quality of revenue. So basically, it's our composite times the recurring revenue percentage. So we want the composite, or the rule of 23, just on our
Hmm.
recurring. So the index favors companies that are not only growing and profitably, but are also building a sustainable and predictable business. This is a
Well,
pretty
I
cool
mean,
one.
I actually like this index because it measures the two critical parts of a business, right?
Yeah.
There's really two essential things that a business has to do. Number one is generate cash. Number two is generate value. A lot of companies can go out and generate cash, but not create value, or they can create value and not generate cash. AKA, you think of the smaller guys that generating cash, creating no value. You think of door to door, there's creating all value and no cash, right? And so this kind of balances the two, which I like. So, okay.
Yeah, it's cool. So basically, the composite, or the rule of 23, in the pest industry, in the software industry, they call it the rule of 40. It triangle, what do you call it? The rule of 30 or 35
Yeah.
or something,
Ours is
right?
30.
Okay.
Yep. Ours is
But
30.
basically you grow 30%, or you have 30% profitability, or some combination thereof to get you there. So why is it important? Well, it shows that in order to grow, if you're growing in a big way, you're sacrificing profitability. If you're very profitable, you're sacrificing growth. And sometimes, and I've watched you do this, like some years you're like, all
Hmm.
right, we got to dial it back and focus on profitability, or
Hmm.
let's step on the gas and grow. And I've watched you do that, and
Hmm.
it's a conscious effort. Now, if you multiply this times your recurring revenue percentage, that becomes really interesting. Okay. So what it shows: revenue growth, increase of total sales, profit growth, increase of earnings. How do you get it? You expand your marketing, you improve your operational efficiency, um, you know, but high revenue growth doesn't guarantee a healthy business. I can't tell you how many companies that we've seen that just grow like crazy, but are one step away from the bankruptcy court because they haven't
Hmm.
figured out that if they grow that quickly and it costs them that much money, that they may or may not be able to pay for that growth out of operating cash, and they got to figure out how to bring it in, right?
Hmm.
So, and so we've got this composite. All times are predictable revenue, which is our recurring to non. Now, this is the interesting. So here's the data, right? The data is that the competitive index is really kind of in that 20% range, with the exception of the Southwest, which I'm sure that we have a company or a couple companies that skewed that, right? Because that's one of the smaller markets. But that is kind of interesting. I don't know, Donnie, if I took Triangle, what do you think you'd be at?
Well, we're very, very high recurring. We sell very little, I mean extremely little one-time work. Um, so I think we would be on the higher end, mainly because of now we don't have the growth. We certainly have the profitability, and we have the recurring revenue. So I don't know what the number would be, but I would imagine we're pretty competitive,
Yeah.
um, just
Okay.
because of that reason. Now I would love for there to be more growth, but what we lack in growth, we made up for in profitability, which the index covers. So we're a
Yep.
strong company. It
Yep.
just, it is. Anytime you're an owner, you want what you don't have. So there you go.
Yep. Well, so that this rule of 23 that everybody talks about in the industry and everything, and again, rule of 35 at Triangle. I think Jerry Galoff at Rollins said he wants to be at 30. If you do any reading about the composite, the software industry talks about the rule of 40. But our
Mhm.
competitive index favors companies that are not only growing and profitable, but also building a sustainable, predictable business model. And that's really
Mhm.
important. So this competitive index takes it one step further from that rule of 23 that everybody talks about. And this is kind of interesting. We're right around 20%. Think about that. That's basically, we said that the industry, based on our results, that 70 to 75% of the business is recurring. So that shows that we're pretty healthy. So that's a
Yeah.
pretty cool. Okay, the detailed P&L. Um, our cost study, we have a whole detailed P&L, every single line item, and you can look at it. But why is it important? Better analysis. We can identify trends. We can improve our decision making, our benchmarking. There's several ways to do benchmarking. You should benchmark against your past, your company past, against your budget, and against the industry. And our study gives you that information. And by the way, if you want a copy of the study, you can get in touch with us. There's some proprietary work that we're doing just for clients, but we're also offering a whole bunch of information to the industry. Um, okay.
Okay.
So what I did is I took the major headings, and as you can see, the one that I picked out was selling and marketing. So basically,
Mhm.
these are our gross margins, and then there's other fixed costs, G&A and G&A other. But the marketing, and I'll talk about the three factors that I think that can either make you soar or tank your business, and I'll talk about that in a couple of slides. But this is the selling and marketing. And I like to go through this example, and I think that you and I probably went through this example 15 years ago. I remember we were at I don't remember where the conference was, but you were like, whoa, that's pretty interesting. If you think about it, right? I go to a mature company and I look at their P&L. They're spending 6 to 8% on marketing, call it 7%, right? So
Mhm.
let's say my signature service is some sort of quarterly at $500 a year of revenue. Well, 6 or 7% of that is $30 to $35. I mean, if I told you I'm going to get you new sales for each sale is going to cost you $30 to $35, how many would you take, right?
Is I'd be going to the bank asking for money.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But how is and so you know that it's not true that right? You're not going to pay
Right.
$30 to $35. Well, how is it that you that the P&L says it's 7%, but we can't do it. It's probably closer to 50%. And it has to do with the longevity of a customer, the lifetime of a customer. So if I'm a brand new customer and I'm putting out 50% on marketing, year one, it's 50%. Year two, if assuming no attrition, it's actually 25%, right? Year three, it's 12.5% because it comes down because your book of business has no um, marketing cost associated with mature accounts, right? So,
Yeah.
so that's kind of interesting. So I talk
Yeah.
about
It's
that.
offsetting the cost. I mean, I think that's the big takeaway is that you're getting a lot of benefit from year two, right?
Yep,
And really year three and beyond. So, yep.
yep. So that's one thing. And then what I talked about is just kind of what are those direct costs, the direct labor, the auto, the materials, and the other. And this gets us to our cost of goods sold, which is the reciprocal of your gross margin, right?
Mhm.
So that's how that works. These direct labor numbers include payroll taxes, health benefits, 401(k) and whatnot. And so what you're seeing is that the average technician cost is right around 25%. West is a little more. That was skewed, I'm sure, and Southwest a little bit lower. That was probably skewed as well. But 25% or so, thereabouts 25, 26%, including all in payroll taxes. Is that kind of consistent what you see at Triangle?
Yeah, I do. And, I was just, as you were talking about this, going back to your even outside of COGS, it looks like to me what's happening is that a lot of the costs are shifting as we're getting more efficient in cost of goods sold. And even in G&A, S&A looks to be higher to me than from before. And it seems like to me like a lot of the costs are getting driven to that area of most businesses. And maybe I'm just looking very, very, very big picture there because
Mhm.
profitability is about normal. It looks like to me
Well,
like people are redistributing the expenses, right? Like we're getting more efficient in other areas, but we're having to spend it in selling and marketing. So,
so
um,
we'll talk about in a couple of slides that whole you know um, ratio of technician to office people and whatnot, and a lot of stuff that you're working on with AI. How do you reduce that in the future? I don't think you'll ever.
mhm,
I think your technicians are your technicians. You're not going to replace them with AI, but you certainly can make a big impact in the office.
mhm.
So let's see. Next slide. So is operating profit. And this is what we're seeing is anywhere from 10 to 20%. And this is the one that's a little bit hokey because owner salary is subtracted out to come to net income, right? So,
Right.
they're all over the place. But what we're seeing is between 10 and 19%. Okay.
Mhm.
And depending on what state you're in, there are different tax rules of what you should pay yourself versus what you should distribute or leave in the company. So this is what we're seeing here. But we know that best in class, we know that in our M&A business that the buyers are looking for a 20% EBITDA margin, which is, you know, so that said, this one's kind of interesting is the ratio the team member activity ratios, and that's revenue per technician, revenue per employee, and the ratio of non-technicians to technicians, which is what I talked about just a few minutes ago. And that one, this is kind of interesting. Our average revenue per tech was right around 200,000, which was about 20,000 more than our cost study from 2019. But our best in class clients are doing close to 300,000. I know, Donnie, you're probably close to that, but this is the average. It's little over 200,000, or you know, maybe 17,000 a month per route or so.
Yeah, and
Uh,
depending on what type of services and frequency has a big impact on that number. So, if you're doing things like triannual, or if you're doing something like quarterly or even bi-monthly, those have massive, massive impacts.
so basically, our revenue per tech is significantly better than it was the last time we did the cost study, but I feel like these are not best in class numbers. Best in class numbers are in the high 200s to around 300.
Hmm.
And a lot of that
Yep.
has, you do monthly service, you're going to be low. You do quarterly service, you're going to be higher. You do 3 time a year service, you're going to be even higher. But here's
Yep.
our average revenue per employee. It's about a buck 40 to a buck 50, which is kind of interesting. And then the ratio of non-tech to tech, meaning office people. This is kind of interesting, right? So it's, you know, 0.37, 0.32.
Are managers in that number
Basically,
as well?
you know, office
Do
people
you,
are in that number. So
but
it's
what about managers?
probably like,
Are
yes, yes. And anybody who's
okay,
not a tech,
got it. Okay,
right? So
yeah,
basically, what we're saying is that it's 1 to 3. If you want CSRs, it's probably 1 to 4. Um,
got it.
but that's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
But what we see is that companies who do just commercial, much higher, right? We don't need as many office people because they don't take as many phone calls. Um,
right.
okay. Um, the um, final one before we kind of wrap this up is the debt ratios and the current ratios, liquidity. Basically, when you look at if you look at a finance book and you talk to any financial analyst or accountant, they get deep into the balance sheet. The issue with that, with family businesses, small businesses, is that what is debt and what is equity? If I lend my company $100,000, is that a loan or is that equity? I'm the owner, right? So that changes things significantly. The other thing is your largest single asset is not on your balance sheet. That's your customer list. So that can
Hmm.
skew, you know, how you're doing. So what I like to look at is the debt ratio that basically is how much debt do I have per asset? And it's more like how much of your fleet do you own, right? So
Hmm.
I got $1 million fleet and I've got $666,000 of debt. That means that, you know, two-thirds of my fleet is owned by the bank. And that's kind of what I looked at, which is exactly where we were. So most people have about a third equity in their fleet. The rest is financed. Then there's something called the current ratio. The current ratio is your cash and accounts receivable over your current liabilities, right? It shows whether you can pay your bills. If it's over one, that means you pay your bills well. Well, everybody's over one, well over one. And then your
I was
quick
gonna say
ratio.
I like
Yeah,
1.25. It's a comfort
yeah,
zone, but that's
yeah,
me. So yep.
yeah. Well, it's interesting because we have a lot of clients who have SBA loans, and the covenant in the SBA is you've got to have 1.25. You got to maintain that. So
Yeah.
the quick ratio is basically the current ratio, but it's just cash. There's no accounts receivable over current liabilities, and that's still over one. So that's kind of nice.
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
there's another one, and this is more for like if you've got a whole bunch of debt, this times interest earned. So the bank or the SBA or whoever you're borrowing money, they want to make sure that you can cover the debt. So essentially, what's happening is your bottom line is covering that interest payment. In this case, Mid Atlantic 3.73 times, Midwest 3.9. So you're probably right around that four number, right? So you're able to cover your debt times four. Okay.
Right.
So that shows stability. Now, the one thing that I told you before that I would say there's three things, in my opinion, that can either make or break you: direct labor, materials, and marketing. I can't tell you how many companies we have newer people in the industry who say, well, I'm best techs because I'm going to pay them 40% of their route. Well, you tell me how that works out once you start to scale your business. You can't make money doing that, right?
Right.
Um, the material percentage, that's just, you need to keep that in check, especially if you're a termite company, because that material is more. And you can talk to this being the prior owner of Coalmarch. You can spend a ton of money and allocate a ton of money to marketing, but what if it doesn't work,
Yeah.
right?
No, it's one that you have to pay attention to and one that you really have to watch like a hawk. Like you need to move fast, right? When someone tells you like you just got to believe or wait for it to work, you can't sit on that very long at all.
Right. And years
Yeah.
ago, you make a commitment to print, or yellow pages or whatnot, and there's nothing you can do. Now you've got a dashboard and you can dial this up and dial it back daily with, all of your digital marketing. And it's really important because you can go broke getting rich if you don't
Hmm.
understand how that works. So these
Yep.
three things will make or break you. Mastery over these three areas is non-negotiable. And so just for, poop and giggles, I put all three of them here. And so you can see what are direct labor and materials and marketing. These we presented this earlier in the presentation, but that's where they are. Okay. And that said, how do you use the study? Create your own P&L, benchmark your performance, identify the variances, analyze your team ratios, access financial health or assess your financial health, and focus on those big three. And that is kind of the presentation that I am giving. By the time this runs, I will have given at Pest World. And if you are interested in receiving data, contact us and push it through, and we can get you, parts of the data. If you're a client of ours, you'll get it all. If you're not a client, you'll get a good piece of it.
I just want to add one thing to what you said, and that is this: is if you're looking at this, and I think that you should, and you're wondering like, okay, I love the focus on the big three. Make sure that your chart of accounts are correct, and make sure any discussion begins with
Yep.
understanding what these ratios mean. And if your chart of accounts aren't in lockstep with this, this could send you down a bad path, right? So just make sure that you understand your chart of accounts and that it's aligned with the cost study. And I think you published something similar to that, Dan. I'm sure if someone has a question on how to structure that, they
Yep.
can reach out to you. But just make sure you do that, because it has a big impact on those percentages. And sometimes you might be chasing a number that's unreachable, or vice versa. You might be looking at something thinking you're killing it, but it's actually because you got something, pushed into a different category. So that would just be my final disclaimer for that.
Yep.
All right.
Cool.
Well, Dan, anything else?
That's
I
the
thought that was
deal.
pretty.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's pretty comprehensive, and
That was good.
you know,
So I'm
it's
glad that we did the dry run. Now I can see that I can do this in an hour and make the presentation right. So I'll be doing that tomorrow afternoon. We're recording this on Wednesday. So
awesome. Well, just a reminder, all the resources and topics that we talked about today are going to be available on the podcast website. Just take a look at pmpindustryinsider.com. Take a look under show notes. And I'm sure you can reach out to Dan if you need a copy of the cost study. And with that, we're going to sign off. We'll see you all next time. Take care.